Welcome back to part 3 of At the Bar series with Rosie, editor of AdNews. So, Rosie, welcome back. More drinking. We've already told our audience we've actually just been sitting here batching our videos and drinking constantly. So
I think that's okay.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere. So, tell us a little bit about, with AdNews, how you measure metrics in your own space.
So we measure our kind of digital traffic through our unique page impressions. We use Google Analytics to look at a whole bunch of things, whether it's impressions or time spent. We look at where our audience comes from. We look at our newsletter for open rates, click-through rates, how much time people are spending on those stories. So we're also measuring our social channels and how much traffic we get through them and our sort of shareability through platforms like Facebook and LinkedIn. We use a widget from Radium One, which tells us how much of our pages are shared via Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, the dark web, and we can kind of track those kind of things. In journalism, it's all about the headline, it's all about the subject line. That's what you're drawing a reader in with. So we've recently started using A/B testing to test different subject lines of the newsletter to see which one kind of takes over first, which one gets more momentum. And from that, we can kind of see which stories people are most interested in and what's going to get us the most traffic. Then we can override and send the remainder of the newsletter to our greater audience with that most successful subject line.
Nice. I've personally learnt the hard way that I should watch what I say to journalists because it will end up in that headline.
Sometimes it does.
Invariably, always, sometimes. So here's a trick one for you. How do you do all of that in print?
There's a measurement's kind of evolving in the publishing industry because of digital and the way that it's kind of changed readership. So it's a really tricky thing for publishers to get a sort of combined audience across their print and online. The standard measurements are Emma and Roy Morgan, which do sort of readership and circulation studies, and they've introduced sort of digital elements of that so that publishers can get a kind of overview of their total audience. But it's still difficult in print. You get a readership number, you get a circulation number. It's still harder to do. You can still measure clicks and digital a lot more easily.
Yeah.
It's getting that total audience view, which is a really difficult thing, but not just for publishers, for anyone in media and advertising. It's hard to get that total audience across devices. More people are reading things on mobile than desktop. How do you make sure that you're tracking everyone, not duplicating people? It's a really tricky thing, measurement.
Definitely, and advertising is the bread and butter, obviously, of any publication. How do your advertisers and their message differ between digital and print?
I think it really depends what the advertiser is trying to achieve, what their objective is. And for that, AdNews is no different to any other publisher, any other media owner, whether it's TV, radio, publishing. Whatever the advertiser's objective is, they use a slightly different message, slightly different creative. So since we relaunched our print magazine 3 months ago as a monthly, we were previously fortnightly, we've positioned it much more as a premium product because it comes out less often, but it's much more in depth. It's a much higher quality product. So from that, we've seen advertisers take up much more premium kind of ad spots. We do a lot more kind of DPS advertising and gatefold advertising from the cover, which is, you know, a rollout ad spot. So it's seen as a much more premium thing. And so depending on what the advertiser is trying to achieve, they'll use online inventory or solar CDMs or MRECs on the site, depending on what they want to achieve and who they want to reach and for what objective.
Obviously, those are the advertisers knowing what the audience wants. How do you know what your audience wants?
It's part looking at the data and the analytics and looking at all those measurement metrics we talked about, looking at the headlines, looking at the topics that come up in our analytics and what's getting read the most. But a part of it is still down to intuition, and that's part of being a good editor, part of being a good journalist, is knowing what your audience is interested in and being able to read that. And that comes from talking to people and knowing what the hot buttons are that they're interested in, the things that are trending with them. And so it's kind of a blend between looking at the data and what that tells you, and just knowing your audience and knowing the content and knowing what appeals.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again this week. So much juicy information for any journos or marketers wanting to know a little bit more about this space. Join us next week for the next session.